Hey everybody, Doomwake here, and welcome back to another episode of Watching the Meta, the weekly series where we take a look at the Magic Online and some paper events when those are available. Spoiler alert, they were available this weekend, and we take a look and see what the heck everybody else is playing. Take a look and see what the metagame spread looks like. Maybe there are some conclusions to be gained from the information that we have this week, and what to expect next week. And specifically with regards to Standard, that is something I'm very interested in because I'm going to be participating in the regional championship in Minneapolis this upcoming weekend. So if you're there, be sure to stop by and say hi. Before we continue, if you enjoy the content, like the video, leave a comment in the comment section down below. And if you would consider subscribing to the channel, that would greatly help out the channel, and I would much appreciate that. So we are going to get started, as we always do, with Modern. And it's Boros Energy. What else did you expect? Boros Energy taking a jump from last week from 25.4% to 31.3%. Now, I think a lot of people sort of expected this to happen when Underworld Breach got banned, because it kind of felt like Boros was being kept in check or being held back by Underworld Breach. It was really difficult to get that matchup to a point where you were comfortable with it. You had to play a lot of sideboard cards. And now that Breach is not in the metagame, Boros can kind of focus its attention a lot more on sideboarding cards for a very specific and targeted metagame. Because if you look at Boros Energy, like what next deck is even remotely close, right? You have Dimir, Izzet, and Storm clocking in at 6.7%. That's like a fifth of the metagame share of Boros. So, yeah, I don't really know. Boros, it seems like it doesn't really have that many bad matchups, with the exception of maybe Belcher. But if you look there, only 3.1% of the metagame. So maybe people got to play more combo decks. I'm not entirely sure. The sweepers do get you some of the way there, but the problem is if you're loading up on sweepers and mulliganing aggressively to them, you're just going to get buried by Flage and Season Pyromancer. So those are my thoughts. I mean, like I said, for next week, if you're looking to play a Modern event, maybe an RCQ or a challenge, if you have the availability to, maybe consider picking up Belcher. I think Belcher is kind of low-key in a good spot right now. But we get some spicy deck lists to take a look at, as we always do on the series. And I don't know if you noticed this, but if you took a look at the winners table, you saw that Mono Black Eldrazi won 2 challenges this weekend. And you might ask yourself, what the heck is that deck? Well, here it is. So Selfie Sec, this person won both of those challenges with the same exact 75. And I've been seeing this deck pop up results over the past couple of weeks, couple of top 32s here and there. There might have been 1 or 2 top 8s, but I can't recall. And now this weekend, they kind of showed exactly why they keep playing this deck. And it's sort of a fairly simple concept. So basically you start with the black interaction because black has access to some of the best with Thoughtseize, Inquisition, and Fatal Push. And then from there, you have some additional threats in the form of Nethergoyf and Emperor of Bones. Emperor of Bones specifically quite good against Boros because it's one of the ways to get Flage out of their graveyard. And then from there, usually in these mid-range decks, you see a supplemental color like red for Lightning Bolt or additional threats, sometimes green for Tarmogoyf. And instead, I call this mono black, but it's actually a 2-color deck. The second color is colorless. So we're playing Kozilek's Command and Thought-Knot Seer, both of these powerful cards requiring a colorless mana to cast, and you're pairing that with a 2-mana land in the form of Eldrazi Temple. I will say, as you can see, this deck has 0 copies of any of the colorless cards that cost 7 or more, so you can't really play Labyrinth, but Temple gets you enough of the way there, especially with Kozilek's Command. And then from there, you have some Urza Sagas for additional threats and also a little bit of utility, combined with Nihil, Spellbomb, Pithing Needle, and Shadow Spear, and a couple of Bowmasters. And basically, that's the entire deck. So it's really just kind of like, this is sort of the way that I envision Jund to look like in 2025, is the way that I would describe it. So if you're still holding on to those Tarmogoyfs, maybe it's time to put them down for some Thought-Knots here. Now, the big question on everybody's mind is, with Underworld Breach banned, what is the best Mox Opal deck? I present to you Jeskai Ascendancy. Now, I don't know if this is the best one, but this is certainly the one that looks the most interesting to me. So first and foremost, you start off with kind of this core, well, I say core, but there's actually no Tamios, which is a little surprising to me. But Emery, Lurker of the Loch, Mox Opal, Mishra's Bauble. That's kind of the core that we're starting with, because Zero's good with Emery, Emery very good at flashing back Bauble. From there, that gets you to basically when Underworld Breach got banned, everybody was trying to figure out what is the best combo package that we can put into these Mox Opal Emery decks. And a lot of people have been gravitating towards Jeskai Ascendancy. So for those of you who don't know, the combo is Ascendancy, Emery, and a 0. You cast the 0, untap the Emery, tap the Emery, cast the 0. You get the idea. You basically just loop that over and over again. It's not infinite draws, but it is infinite Ascendancy +1/+1. So if you have enough blockers, or you can clear blockers, then you can kill them in one shot. And then with all of the zeros, that gets you to quite possibly one of the best cards in Magic right now, Cori-steel Cutter, where you can go turn 2, Cori-steel Cutter. You can obviously play a 0 on turn 2 with it to make a token. You can give your Emery haste on a turn where you have 3 mana, where you go 1 mana Emery equip, then you can do some stuff there. It also works very well with Urza Saga tokens, because not only do you have another way to give them haste, but also another way to give them trample, and that is huge. And then past the combo / Urza Saga portion of the deck, we have some Stoneforges, which is kind of cool because you have the traditional plan of Stoneforge for Kaldra, but if you're worried about a kill spell, you can just go get a Cori-steel Cutter, and that's pretty good too. So a lot of cool things to like about this deck. Again, I'm surprised to see no Tamios, but this is definitely, if you were bummed out about buying Mox Opal and Underworld Breach got banned, this might be the deck for you. All right, next up, we got a bit of a strange one here from Blue Dragon in 19th place. So I've noticed a trend over the past couple of weeks where Dimir players are just not playing Oculus anymore. Most of the blue-black decks that are having even some sort of amount of success are basically just all Murktides, Frogs, and no Oculus. This deck is kind of going back to the roots a little bit. So we have the threat package of Psychic Frog and a Boron Oculus, because those work pretty well, especially when combined with Unearth. But then from there, we are pairing that with a small Reanimator package. So we have Hedron Crab to mill ourselves, along with Stitcher's Supplier. We have a full 8 suite of 4 Gristlebrand and 4 Ulamog the Defiler. And then Goryo's Vengeance to get him back. Now, I have seen some versions of this deck utilize Archon of Cruelty and Persist, because Persist is another way to get back Oculus, which I think is good. But the upside of playing Gristlebrand and Ulamog the Defiler with Goryo's Vengeance is that your Agatha's Soul Cauldrons now have extremely good targets in the form of Gristlebrand. So any creature you have can turn into pay 7, draw 7, and then you kind of get the idea from there. You can figure it out. And what I like about Cauldron is it also works very well with Psychic Frog. So some cool things to like about this. Emperor of Bones, also another way to reanimate either Gristlebrand or Ulamog. And specifically with Ulamog, it works the way you want it to, where when you put the Ulamog into play from the Emperor, it'll see itself in exile before it comes into play. So that's kind of cool as well. Yeah, really clean looking list. If you're into the sort of Reanimator side of things, maybe give this one a shot. Now, I talked a little bit about Goblin Charbelcher in the beginning, where we were discussing the metagame and suggesting that maybe it would be a good idea to bring that one back. This is not exactly what I had in mind when I was talking about Belcher, but it's possible that maybe this one is even better against Boros. So Celestial in 4th place, that's a name you might recognize. This individual does quite well in a lot of challenges. And what we have here is mono red Belcher. So we've sort of decided to eschew the blue, which gives you a lot of card selection and interaction, but you sacrifice a lot of speed. And we're getting a lot of speed here. So 4 Ruby Medallion to make all of your rituals discounted, 4 Desperate, 4 Manamorphose, and 4 Pyretic. So you have the 12 rituals to pair with the medallions, similar to Ruby Storm. And then you also have, Iron Crag Feet. So this one is very good with Goblin Charbelcher, because for 4 mana, you make 7. So that's +3. The downside is you can only cast 1 more spell. as it turns out, 7 mana is the perfect number for Belcher plus Activate, so you really only need one more spell. And what I like about this approach is that you're not really all in on Belcher in the same way that Mono Blue is, because your backup plan is just cast a couple of rituals and then play a Stormscale Scion. So even if you only Stormscale for 3, right? You have 3 Stormscale Scions in play. They all get +2/+2 because they all pump each other. So you have 3 6/6s. That's going to kill most people in Modern after a couple fetches or a shockland. So I kind of like this approach. You also have the Bitter Reunions to give them haste, which is pretty powerful too if you can assemble a couple extra mana during your combo turn. So you have more ways to kill than just Belcher. And you have a couple of draw spells like Glimpse the Impossible. The Bitter Reunions can also cantrip you. So an interesting approach to Belcher. I guess what the question you have to ask yourself is, do you want the additional speed against other combo decks, or do you want the interaction to be able to answer hate in the post-board games? That's the question you have to ask yourself. But in any case, sweet looking deck list. That's it for Modern. Let's dive on in and over to Pioneer. All right, here we are taking a look at the metagame for the weekend in Pioneer. Now, Pioneer's it's weird. It's really hard to describe. So a couple of weeks ago, we saw the absolute dominance of mono red mice. I think it was 33% of the top 32 metagame. For context, this is the top 32s of the Magic Online challenges. And it went down to 26, and now it's down to 24. So a little bit of a downtick there. Is it Phoenix up from 16 to 20? Which I think that makes a lot of sense. I would have to imagine that the Phoenix deck with somewhere between 8 to 10 kill spells has to have a reasonable matchup against mono red. And not only that, a lot of the Phoenix decks, and we'll take a look at this in a second, are incorporating Cori-steel Cutter into the mix. And then from there, you have mono black, which is a huge uptick from last week. I don't even see it on my graph last week, but this week it's 13.8% of the metagame. I think it was somewhere in 1 to 2% range last week. It says mid-range. It is demons. Like, I think there was maybe 1 or 2 people who weren't playing the demon package. So you kind of have a big 3 here of mono red, Phoenix, and mono black. And I think it's sort of like a rock, paper, scissors where Phoenix beats red, red beats mono black beats Phoenix, or something along those lines. So it's really hard to figure out exactly which one of those 3 you want to be on in a given weekend. My personal bias would just be play Cori-steel Cutter because it's completely messed up. So I'd probably lean towards Phoenix because I think it is the better Cutter deck than mono red. Although I think mono red is maybe an all-around better deck. So yeah, everything else, nothing too crazy to talk about here. Prowess, most of those lists are on 3 to 4 Cutters, a couple Lotus Field, a couple of Cage decks. Those lists are on, I think, 3 copies of Craterhoof Behemoth. So if you want to check out the Cage deck, we featured that one in last week's episode with Claudio, so go check that out. But with all of that said, what do we have in the Spice Corner this week? So first one from Tunak in 17th place. This is Crimes of the Abzan variety. So what I really like about this list is the main deck features 4 Scrabbling Claws and 4 Ghost Vacuum. And you might say to yourself, is there really that many graveyard decks? Well, first of all, kind of yes, because you just get some free game 1 equity against Izzet Phoenix. So that's pretty cool. And then what you're doing with these is you're utilizing them to trigger other cards. So you have both Freestrider Lookout and Ketramos the New Dawn. These are Ketramos pays you off for exiling a card from a graveyard, which both of those artifacts do. And then Lookout gives you, whenever you commit a crime, you basically get to put a land into play from the top 5. Yeah, top 5. And Vacuum and Claws both commit crimes. So not only do both of these cards work very well with both Freestrider Lookout and Ketramos, they're also colorless cards for Ugin Eye of the Storms. Freestrider Lookout lets you hit a bunch of extra land drops, and it ramps you. And the big issue that I've always had with these Crimes deck is, what is your big payoff for ramping? And I have not been able to find that answer. Maybe Ugin's the card we were looking for. And honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, we have Vacuum, Lookout, Ketramos, and Ugin legal and standard. New deck on the horizon, perhaps? The rest of this deck is just a bunch of good interaction. Vanishing Verse, which triggers both Lookout and Ketramos. Fatal Push, just a good card, same with Thoughtseize. And then you have some other exile removals that are ways to trigger Ketchamos and Lookout, and then 24 lands. Really clean looking list. They're really tempting me to play Pioneer because some of these decks look really sweet. And this one is definitely no exception. All right, so we talked a little bit about Rakdos prowess. This one from MTGO grinder Hamuda in 19th place. Hamuda plays a ton of Magic Online, and their Rakdos prowess list I wanted to highlight because it is playing one of my favorite cards of all time, and I had to give this one a shout out. So Hamuda kind of playing the sort of the normal stuff where you'd see Monastery Swift Spear, Soul Scar Mage, Cori-steel Cutter, removal spells, Monstrous Rage, Thoughtseize. You kind of get the idea behind those cards. But what we're playing is, instead of like Kumano Faces Kakazan and some more burn spells and pump spells, we're eschewing those for more individually powerful threats. Fear of Missing Out and Dreadhorde Arcanist. So what's cool about Fear of Missing Out is it gives you another good target for Claim to Fame, which is kind of like a sort of weird unearth that's legal in Pioneer. Not quite the same thing, but pretty close. You do have enough types here where you have creature, instant, sorcery, land, and a couple of artifacts. So you have a decent spread type, and a lot of your cards naturally go to the graveyard, right? Sorceries, instants. I guess land and creature is a little tough, but again, you can discard land or creature to the Fear of Missing Out, and it's an enchantment itself. So you have that. It also gives you additional attack steps, which is really good with Cori-steel Cutter. Now, the other card that I want to highlight here is Dreadhorde Arcanist, because a lot of people have thought about Arcanist over the years, and it really never kind of like does what you want it to do. But what I like about Dreadhorde Arcanist is it gives you a way to cast a free spell, which he was really good with Cori-steel Cutter. So, a little bit more of a mid-range approach to prowess, but again, I think if I were to play one of these prowess decks, this is probably closer to where I'd want to be. And then real quick shout out to this list from Boy Triton, who won a Pioneer Challenge. Just wanted to show you what the Phoenix deck is looking like. Basically, they've just trimmed on some of the flex spots for 4 Cori-steels. They're still playing 4 Arclight Phoenix and 4 Picklock Pranksters, so we're not trimming on Phoenix, which is something I know people had discussed when the card came out. Still playing 4 Artist Talent because that card is completely broken in half in this deck. All the cantrips, cruises, removal spells. So just to give you an idea, if you're interested in playing Cutter and Phoenix, this is what they're looking like. But with all of that said, let's get to the format that I am most interested in for this weekend, Standard. And here it is. So from last week, we had the last week's pie chart or graph looked just so strange, right? You had 13% Oculus, 12 Jeskai, 10 Pixie, 10 Prowess, 10 Omniscience, 10 Mono Red. Every single deck was represented. And now it seems like we have gotten down to 3, right? Jeskai, Oculus, Izzet Prowess, and Mono Red, all roughly occupying the same space in the metagame, somewhere between 17 and 19% of the top 32s. I will say this also includes the regional championship in Bologna, as well as a super qualifier. So the regional championship in Bologna was won by Izzet Prowess. The super qualifier on Magic Online was won by Mono Red. So Oculus, the lone man out in that scenario. But really, this Standard and this particular week, as well as the regional championship data from Bologna, has indicated that this has become a 3-deck format. I guess you could, depending on, I know, a lot of people want to lump Izzet Prowess and Mono Red together, but what I will say about that, and, they are both technically red aggressive decks. Depending on the Phoenix list, they can play out very differently. There was actually a bit of contention in the Izzet Prowess camp as to whether or not you want to play Slickshot, Show Off, and Monstrous Rage, or eschew those cards entirely. Personally, because I'll tell you this, full spoiler alert, I'm going to play Prowess in the regional championship. As of right now, I'm recording this on Tuesday. Decklists are due in 3 days. I have no idea what version of Prowess I want to play. So hopefully can do some testing in the next couple of days. But anyways, Standard is really about these 3 decks, and you need to have a very good plan against Oculus, Prowess, and Mono Red. And they sort of all, not going to say they're attacking you from different angles, right? You have Oculus that plays like the cheap creatures prof stuff, plus they also have graveyard recursion that you need to have answers for. Prowess, you need to be able to answer the low to the ground stuff, but then also play a long game with stock up talent. And then mono red is mono red. That one's pretty face up. Past those three decks, the only other deck that got close was Dimir Midrange, which is a bit of a shocker, but with the increase and uptick in red decks, I sort of understand it. The problem with Dimir Midrange is blue-black does not have an answer to a resolved cutter, so if they resolve that card, good luck. But with all that said, again, let's go ahead and take a look at some deck lists. Now, one of the most interesting decks to come out of the weekend was from the regional championship in Bologna. Not this exact list. I want to say they're a couple cards different. Got 10th place, just barely missed out on top 8 on tiebreakers. And the person who was in the regional championship, they were playing something basically just Battlefront artifacts. So United Battlefront, which is the collected company variant from the new set. It's Coca, but it's for non-creatures. Pairs very well with Simulacrum Synthesizer and removal spells like Perilous Snare and Braided Net, where if you hit, say, a Synthesizer and a Braided Net or a Snare off of your Battlefront, you get the trigger of the Synthesizer because they're coming into play at the same time, and then you have Battlefront to make more constructs the next turn. The one big difference that I will say, this particular user who won one of the challenges is playing main deck High Noon. The list from the RC did not have main deck High Noon. Now, I understand that Prowess is probably the one deck to beat this weekend. Not sure if you want to play main deck High Noon, if you want to go that far, but I understand and I can appreciate the desire to want to beat Prowess that badly. The one thing I will note about this particular, this list also has more repurposing bays. The person who played in Bologna only had 2. The one thing I wanted to mention about this list, and I think this is sort of the innovation here, is 4 Iron Crags. And when I was playing this deck, I think I maybe played 1 or 2 copies. But the reality is, Standard is so fast right now, and none of your opponents are going to give you time. You need to maximize the amount of nut draws, and turn 2 Iron Crag into turn 3 Battlefront, that's this deck's nut draw. So play 4 Iron Crags. I know it's legendary. Trust me, it'll work out. Next up here, we have the one and only Mick Winsauce. You've probably heard that name before if you've ever looked at a Magic Online deck list. And Mick Winsauce participated in the Standard Super Qualifier, and they got top 8 with this Abzan version of Pixie. I have seen this version pop up. I like the way this list looks. The reason for that is it's playing Overlord of the Baelmerc. And if I recall correctly, I don't think the original version had Baelmercs. When you're playing Yathan Roadwatcher, realistically, this deck only, because you don't count the Baelmercs and the Roadwatchers, this deck only has 18 hits. And if you're playing Roadwatcher with an empty graveyard, you're not actually that likely to hit off of it. So playing a Baelmerc and milling more cards gives you an extra bite at the apple to try and make sure that you're more likely to hit. Actually, E17 because there's a Shieldred. But the idea is you're playing the Pixie plus Sunpearl Kirin package with obviously Hopeless Nightmare, Momentum Breaker, Nowhere to Run. But then you're playing powerful 3s like Skirmish Rhino and Severance Priest to then get those back with Roadwatcher. The one thing I will note about this deck, I was very impressed with Severance Priest when I played it. It kind of gets your opponent into this weird situation where they want to kill it, but if they kill it with the trigger on the stack, they don't get a token out of it because it's 2 separate triggers on the priest. So they kind of have to let it die and then just hope to draw another removal spell. Now, there is obviously some downsides where if you take an expensive card and then they kill it, that's not that great. But even in situations like that, you can just go Roadwatcher, get it back, take a smaller card, then trade for their big token, and everything is fine. I don't know if I can necessarily give my sign-off on playing Pixie this weekend, but if I was playing Pixie, I think I would lean towards something more like this than Esper. Next up here, we have Soggy Cheerios. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm not a big fan of Cheerios that are soggy, but maybe the player is a little bit better than the tasty breakfast dish. But in any case, we have a mono white Ugin deck. Now, what's interesting about this is you are basically not going to say mono white tokens because there's no caretakers or carrot cakes, but basically your mono white control. The one really nice thing about playing mono white is you get to play quite possibly the best removal spell in the format that only one deck can play, and that's Lay Down Arms. There's a huge restriction on it because you need to play a ton of planes, but it is very, very good. So that's nice. Then you're playing 4 Day of Judgment as sweepers along with a 1 copy of Lockdown. And then you have Beza and Overlord to help buy you time in the mid game. And then our big sort of finish here is we're playing Hedron Archive and the Iron Crag, which help us ramp into 4 copies of Ugin Eye of the Storms as your like really big top end card. The downside to this deck is you do have to put Hedron Archive into your deck because you can't really play Ugin without it. You need some sort of way to ramp into it. Getting to 7 mana is just like kind of not realistic in a lot of games, especially if you're, I mean, this deck I guess is more likely to do it with the Wraths. But what's nice about the colorless cards, specifically the 2 mana ones like Maze Mind Tome and the Iron Crag, is that once you eventually get to the Ugin, you can make colorless mana and then cast one of those 2 mana cards to get an extra exiled permanent out of the deal. And then a couple of get losts, more removal spells, and yeah, pretty simple. Clean mana base. When you're playing mono white, you do get to play more utility lands like Field and Fountain Port. Just be a little bit careful because the planes count does matter a lot with Lay Down Arms. And last but not least, another one from the regional championships in Bologna. Now, I believe this particular player, Adria Martin, was the only person, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, to bring Boros Monument to the RC. There might have been 1 or 2 others. I don't know if we had the full metagame breakdown, but this player made top 32. They got 29th place and qualified for the Pro Tour. So what is new about this deck? Because if you've watched on the channel before, I believe we had a video, I want to say maybe about a month ago after Aether Drift came out, and I was very, very high on this deck because specifically Guardian of New Benalia combined with Monument to Endurance is an extremely powerful combination where you have the Monument in play, you are discarding cards to the Guardian for free because you don't need to spend mana, and then you can kind of pop off with either having a second Monument in play or with the Mycosynth Gardens, which effectively is another copy of Monument. So the new cards here that we're trying out are a couple of copies of Tursa Lightshatter, and that's really it. But Tursa does make a lot of sense in this deck. Discard cards, very good with Monument, fill the graveyard, help Delirium for fear of missing out, and most importantly, it is a high-value reanimate target for your Recommission and Helping Hand. I get a lot of questions of why this deck plays 4 Recommission and 1 Helping Hand because Helping Hand costs 1 mana. Recommission can reanimate Monument to Endurance, whereas Helping Hand can't, and that actually comes up a decent amount. But yeah, this deck looks really cool. I don't really have enough experience with the Prowess matchup to be comfortable playing a deck like this, and ultimately I would have to guess the Prowess matchup is not great because if they're playing a lot of Spell Pierces, they can counter those Monuments. I could see it being a little tough. This deck's curve is a little too high. So I don't know if I can necessarily give you a sign off for this weekend, but it is definitely a sweet deck to bring in the ladder. And with all of that said, that is going to wrap up this week's edition of Watching the Meta. Again, I'm going to be in Minneapolis this weekend. So if you're there, be sure to stop by and say hi. I would love to meet you. And that's all I got for today. Again, I'm probably going to play Prowess this weekend. Not exactly sure what the list is going to look like, but in any case, I'm ready to have a blast. And again, thank you all so much for watching. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new and you enjoyed the content. And until next week, adios.